ABC Bullion, the Australian bullion company.
Jim, we know that China has restricted gold imports almost completely since June of this year. Do you think that's temporary? And what do you think it says about the US-China relationship and the gold market?
Well, it's definitely part of the currency war, and it's important to understand why China is limiting the gold imports. It's not that they don't want gold. They want all the gold they can get. They've more than tripled their reserves over the last 10 years. They're a very large mining output, about 500 tons per year, the largest in the world. So they definitely have the appetite for gold. However, there's a dollar shortage in China. They have trillions in US dollar denominated external debt. They're worried about their reserve position being depleted. You know, in 2017, their reserve position went from $4 trillion to $3 trillion. So they lost $1 trillion very quickly. That could happen again. So they've got capital controls. They don't want to buy gold because it means the dollars have to come out of China to pay for the gold. So it is part of the currency wars. It may last for a while. It may not be over immediately. Now, again, important to understand their appetite for gold is as strong as ever, but they're doing this certainly as a temporary measure to limit dollar outflows. Whether it gets extended remains to be seen. It depends. Will China strike a large deal with the United States to end the trade wars and end the currency wars, at which point China might be able to open up the capital account again? I'm very doubtful. I think this trade war, currency war, really Cold War too, if you want to think of it that way, is going to get worse and continue. So I would expect that this may impinge on China's gold imports. The good news is that the rest of the world seems to have more appetite for gold than ever.
You mentioned in your answer the dollar shortage. Do you think the dollar shortage in China and other emerging markets presents a systemic risk to the global economy?
That's a very good question. It's one I'm asked frequently. They say, well, Jim, you've outlined various scenarios, sort of fissures, cracks in the system, ways in which we could have a new financial crisis or even just a cyclical recession, maybe turning into a depression. They're different things. The business cycle and a financial panic are two different things. But sometimes they can converge. They can come together exactly as they did in 2008. So the problem when you say there's a dollar shortage, people say, wait a second. The U.S. Federal Reserve printed $4 trillion between 2008 and 2014. How could there be a dollar shortage? Well, the answer is, well, the Fed was busy printing $4 trillion. The world added $100 trillion of debt. So even with that amount of money creation, the lack of velocity, the lack of expansion of broader definitions of money still leave us with a dollar shortage relative to the debts denominated in dollars. Now, China's a big part of the problem, but so is Turkey. So are a lot of other countries around the world. And people say, well, Jim, what's going to cause this financial panic? It's a long list. To me, it's less important figuring out what's going to cause it as the fact that it will happen and it will be severe. However, if you say, well, you have to give me the list, give me your top 5 choices, this would be very close to the top. And the point is, you see, for example, China's, the amount of U.S. Treasury securities that China owns is declining. People say, oh, China's dumping Treasury securities because they're fighting currency war with the United States. No, they are selling them, the amount is declining, but they need the dollars. And so that's really what's critical. So that links to why do they not want gold imports? They need the dollars. Why are they selling U.S. Treasuries? They need the dollars. And that is also going to continue. And we've seen some monetary tightening by the United States, rate increases and balance sheet reductions over the past 2 years. Now, that's recently reversed. The Fed on July 31st cut rates. They also announced that they were ending their program of reducing the money supply, actually destroying money, the opposite of quantitative easing. So they have started to ease again, but the problem is, remember, monetary policy works with a lag. So what we're suffering right now is the result of policies from 2017 and 2018. We won't get the benefit of this new easing until next year. So this dollar shortage is going to get worse, and it could turn into something bigger. You see it in Argentina, Turkey, Brazil, China, and other countries. So it really bears watching. It's the kind of thing that an unexpected bank failure could lead to a worldwide contagion.
Jim, what's the likely future for Australia when its key security partner, being the US, is in the developing Cold War with its key economic partner, being China?
Well, Australia is called the lucky country for a reason. It's approaching, not quite there yet, but approaching 30 years without a recession. So I don't think you get very far by predicting, recession or business cycle downturn in Australia. It's got a very well-educated, productive population, wonderful natural resources, tourism, exports. It has a lot going for it. Having said that, Australia, for better or worse, is joined at the hip with China. Australia has really hitched itself to China. So if China slows down, Australia's going to slow down. There's no way it can be otherwise. So exports from Australia, iron ore, copper, other agricultural products, etc., are going to slow down. They already are because China its growth is slowing down very, very rapidly, surprising a lot of observers. Good reason to think that China's growth is, the official numbers are overstated, not a complete lie, but overstated because the account investment really is worthless. That an accountant would make you write off if you weren't a sovereign country. So the growth is lower than many people believe. It's probably getting even lower than that, slowing down more. That will affect Australia. The other way Australia is affected is the capital exports from China, but basically the capital flows out of China. We're coming into Australia, so the real estate boom in Melbourne, Sydney, Perth, other cities, both in terms of bidding up prices and construction, that's slowing down. We've seen property values declining in Australia. So I'm not predicting a recession for Australia. I am predicting lower interest rates and more of a devaluation of the Australian dollar against the US dollar. I know it's come down a lot already, but it will probably come down some more.
As the world's second largest gold producer, with most of that metal going over to China, how does that complicate Australia balancing its relationship between the US and China?
Well, I am continually astounded at the ignorance of gold as a valuable monetary asset in the United States. Now, it's funny, the United States is the largest gold holder in the world, over 8,000 tons. People are surprised to learn that about 78% of the U.S. reserves are actually in gold. You'll say, well, what's your reserve position? Well, around the world, it's 60% U.S. dollar denominated assets. Other currencies, Swiss franc, UK pound sterling, Japanese yen. There's a slice around the world for Australian and Canadian dollars as well. But the U.S. has 78% of its reserves in gold. Now, in fairness, the U.S. doesn't really need foreign currency reserves because we print dollars. But the fact is that the U.S. is a very large gold holder. Having said that, you talk to American institutions, American individuals. I've spoken to a lot of government officials, Treasury officials. They don't take gold seriously as a monetary asset. The reason that's important for Australia, if you were shipping almost anything else to China, the U.S. might think you were sort of profiting at our expense because China's put tariffs on U.S. exports to China. The U.S. has put tariffs on Chinese exports to the United States. We're fighting a trade war. Australia wins a little bit in that, as do Brazil and Canada and some other countries, because China could diversify those purchases. So the U.S. might get upset if Australia were selling a lot more soybeans, but they don't seem to care about gold, so I think it kind of flies under the radar.
With Russia pivoting eastwards and firming up its relationship with China, do you think Russia risks being seen as somehow more junior or subordinate partner to China? What do you think about their rapid accumulation of gold reserves? What message does that send to the rest of the world?
Well, Russia and China are doing exactly the same thing. Now, the way I look at geopolitics, and by the way, this is straight from Henry Kissinger's book, World Order, which I highly recommend. Even I think Kissinger is approaching 90, I know he's in his late 90s, whether he's 96 or 97. He's as sharp as ever. I mean, he's physically got some limitations, but his mind is as sharp as ever. And the way I think about geopolitics, there are only three countries in the world that really matter: the United States, Russia, and China. People say, well, wait a second, I get the United States and China, two largest economies in the world. How does Russia fit in there? It's the largest landmass in the world, the largest nuclear arsenal in the world, one of the three largest exporters of oil and natural gas. It's one of only a few countries that make nuclear power plants. I could go on and on, but the fact is you cannot discard Russia as a world player, even though it has its problems. And a lot of Americans do, and that's really very misguided. So for those viewers who are poker players, there's an old saying in poker: if you're in a three-handed poker game and you don't know who the sucker is, you're the sucker. In other words, two players will always gang up on the third player, clean them out, and then they'll turn on each other. That's how you play poker. So if you think about the three countries, United States, Russia, and China, ideally it should be 2 against 1. And the United States was always brilliant at pivoting at just the right time. In early 1970s, we embraced China as a way of isolating the Soviet Union. In the 1990s, after Tiananmen Square, we embraced Russia, post-communism, as a way of isolating China, punishing it for what happened at Tiananmen Square. So we've always been able to pivot back and forth. It was always 2 against 1. It was either U.S. and Russia against China or U.S. and China against Russia. Now, unfortunately, I think as a major historic failure of U.S. foreign policy, it's suddenly Russia and China against the United States. We're the sucker. Now, Trump understood this at some level and wanted to understand that China was the main enemy, and Trump wanted to reach out to Russia, but along comes this whole Russian collusion scandal. I don't need to bore the viewers with the details of that. It was really a ginned up a frame job of the president, but what it did, it made it impossible for the U.S. to normalize relations with Russia because of all the allegations flying around. As a result, you're absolutely right, the relationship between Russia and China has blossomed at the expense of the United States. Whether that can be repaired, I don't know, but I do know that the U.S.-China relationship is not getting better. By the way, the touchstone for that, in October 2018, Vice President Michael Pence gave a speech to the Hudson Institute, publicly available. You can get it on the U.S. On the White House website, where he put the trade war and the currency war in a larger context: theft of intellectual property, human rights abuses, geopolitical expansion, trouble in the South China Sea, many other issues, and really framed it as what a lot of analysts call Cold War II. Interesting, it's called the Pence Doctrine. It's probably the only time in his life that Trump let somebody else put his name on something. But I do recommend that. It's 10 pages or so, but it helps you to understand the trade wars and the currency wars. So the U.S. is confronting China. That's going to get worse. It would be nice to, you can't be naive about the Russians. They're thugs and murderers and autocrats. But it would be nice if the U.S. could have a better relationship with Russia, but unfortunately we don't.
Jim, what about special drawing rights, or SDRs, in the future? How do you see their role changing? Do you think they can compete for gold as a reserve asset with supranational entities?
Right. It's funny when you say SDRs, people say, "Oh, is that strawberry daiquiri on the rocks or what?" Let's see. It stands for special drawing rights. I call it world money because it is world money. But elite central bankers and global monetary elites like to come up with really strange names for things that everyday people don't understand it. The best example: why is the Federal Reserve System not called the Central Bank of the United States? You have the Central Bank of Russia, the People's Bank of China. Why don't we call it the Central Bank of the United States? The reason is Americans hate central banks. We had 2 of them. We got rid of both of them, one in 1816 and one in 1836. And when the United States had no central bank from 1836 to 1913, a period of great prosperity and innovation. So it proves that you don't need a central bank. But we have one, but they gave it a funny name, the Federal Reserve. It's the same thing with the IMF. The special drawing right, SDR, is world money. The IMF can print it. They can hand it out to its members. If you're a geek like me and you've actually read the Articles of Association of the IMF, you learn that they can give it to other multilateral institutions. The IMF could give special drawing rights to the United Nations to pursue a climate change agenda, which is really just cover for world government and world taxation. So, but they're really going to come to the fore in the next financial crisis, and here's why. And I make a point. In 1998, we had a financial panic. Did not have a recession, but we had a financial panic. It involved Russia and a large U.S. hedge fund, long-term capital management. By the way, I was there. I negotiated that bailout, so I had a front row seat on that one. But Wall Street came in and bailed out a hedge fund. Come forward 10 years, what happened? Wall Street was in distress. The central banks came in and bailed out Wall Street. But now the debt hasn't gone anywhere. Now it's on the books of the central banks. In the next crisis, who's going to bail out the central banks? And that's the point. They haven't normalized. If the Fed had taken the balance sheet from $800 billion to $4.5 trillion, and then taken it back down to $800 billion, I would be the first one to applaud. I would say, hey, nice going. You avoided a depression. You normalized. You're ready for the next one. That didn't happen. The first part happened. They took the balance sheet up. But they've only taken it down a little. They want to get interest rates to 4%, but in late December 2018, Jay Powell admitted defeat. He said, we can't get there. We're trying to get to 4%, so we're ready for the next recession. but we can't get there without causing a recession. The U.S. came very close at the end of 2018 to going into recession. So the Fed has admitted defeat. It takes about 4 percentage points of rate cuts to get the U.S. out of a recession. How do you cut rates 4% when you're only at 2? The answer is you can't. You're going to get to 0 quickly. You're going to go back to QE. But there's a confidence boundary. Remember, you're not starting from 800 billion anymore. You're starting from 4 trillion. At what point, 5 trillion, 6 trillion, et cetera, do the American people, and for that matter, investors around the world say, you know what, I don't know what's going on here. Get me out of the dollar. Get me gold, silver, land, oil, water, any tangible asset. And you basically destroy confidence in the dollar. Well, in that scenario, and it wouldn't just be the dollar, by the way, it would be the euro and the yen and the other major currencies. Who has the only clean balance sheet? What is the only institution in the world in a position to do a rescue? The answer is the IMF. It's only leveraged about 3 to 1. It can print STRs in unlimited quantities, give them to the members, and re-liquefy the world. If that happens, it's going to come at a price, because you're going to need China's vote and Russia's vote and others to do that. And they're going to insist that that's the end of the dollar as the benchmark global reserve currency, which could be hyperinflationary. So I'm not running the IMF, I understand it, but I'm not running it. My solution is just buy gold, go to the sidelines, you'll do fine.
Gold's been in a stealth bull market since 2015, and the recent price breakout has attracted a bit more attention by the media. But when will the public actually come in? Because we haven't seen a lot of public interest in gold at the moment.
Well, I think it's starting now, and you're right, it's getting a lot of attention lately. But we had, just quickly, we had a great bull market from 1971 to 1980. Gold went from $35 an ounce to $800 an ounce. That was a 2,000% increase in that first bull market. Then we had a long, drawn-out, slow 20-year bear market where it went from $800 to about $250 by 1999. Then we had the second great bull market from 1999 to 2011. It went from $250 an ounce to $1,900 an ounce. That was over 700% gain. And then we had a second great bear market from 2011 to 2015 where gold went down about 50%. And I'm sure a lot of the viewers lived through that, and it was a pretty brutal time. By 2015, sentiment couldn't be worse. The price hit a low at $1,050 an ounce. But the funny thing about bull and bear market turning points is very few people, if any, notice them when they happen. You can look back and say, oh, that was the low. But at the time, when it was 1050, there were prominent economists saying gold's going to 800, et cetera. Well, it didn't. It's up about 50% from there. We are in the third great bull market. If you take the last two, a 2,000% gain and a 700% gain, well, we're up 45%, 50% approximately. We have a long way to go. So this bull market did start in mid-December 2015. It's up nicely, but it has a very long way to go. It's nowhere near over. Yeah, there'll be volatility. That's bound to happen. But it is finally getting attention because we're hitting new levels. We're over where we were 6 years ago. 1,400 boom, 1,500 boom. I think we can confidently say this will go over $2,000. I actually have a much higher intermediate term forecast, but you don't have to go there. You can just say you can see your way clear to $2,000 without difficulty. $2,000 an ounce.
Jim, would you like to comment on the gold-silver ratio in the next answer, and also perhaps give us some other thoughts on your price targets for gold?
Well, I have one view on the gold and silver ratio, which is it doesn't exist. And what I mean by that is there's a ratio. You can take the price of gold divided by the price of silver, and you get a number. And I think the number today is around 80 or 90, somewhere in there. I don't know exactly. And you hear a lot of commentators say, well, the gold-silver ratio is 16 to 1. So if it's 80 to 1, it's 5 times greater than it should be. And that means silver has to go up 500%. Well, let's just start with the ratio. There is no ratio other than just kind of derived mathematics. The 16 to 1 has an historical legacy. It came about in the late 19th century during the 1890s in the United States at a time when the Republican Party wanted a hard gold standard. The U.S. wasn't there yet, but we were moving towards that. And the Democratic Party, which represented farmers and Western industrial interests, wanted easy money. Well, if you run a gold standard or close to it, that's not necessarily easy money. But if you could make silver more expensive, if you could make silver more plentiful, that was the way to increase the money supply. So the silver miners lobbied United States senators. They got a law passed that said the ratio of gold to silver was 16 to 1, and since gold was fixed, that meant the silver had to be higher. So that's where the 16 to 1 comes from. It's not geology, it's not supply and demand, it's not market economics, it's not a hard law of science. It's just a political lobbying job by a bunch of senators who said, sure, we'll give the Western mining interests whatever they want in exchange for campaign contribution. So that's where it comes from, which means that it has no foundation in economics or geology or supply and demand. Having said that, I'm certain that if gold goes up, silver will go up. Not necessarily the fixed ratio, not necessarily as fast, although there are times when silver goes up faster. The fact that it is lagged and gold is going up might mean that silver is ready for an explosive breakout. So I'm bullish on silver. I own silver. I recommend silver side by side with gold. I wouldn't get too hung up on the ratio. I think it's enough to say that gold's going up, silver is not going to get left behind.
Well, Jim, I think that brings us to the end of our Q&A. And on behalf of everyone at ABC, I'd just like to say thank you very much for your time and the fulsome answers you gave to our questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Great to be with you.
Trading since 1972, ABC Bullion is Australia's largest independent bullion dealer and precious metals depository. Fully insured and verified by independent audit. Drawing on deep market expertise, ABC Bullion offers a range of proprietary investment products and storage solutions, including private vaulting and Australia's first gold and silver accumulation plan. ABC Bullion, the Australian Bullion Company.